Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I got a bunch of stuff to get to. Trump stuff and Alyssa Milano stuff and Boy Scout stuff and all kinds of things that are apocalyptic in nature. The heat wave and stuff that's going on in the western part of our country and the building thing and all these things in Florida. But let's start here in Britney land. And this isn't going to be about Britney as much as it's going to be about what this means to the rest of us, because it does mean something to the rest of us. Judge denies request to remove Britney Spears' father as conservator. Britney Spears is afraid of her father and will refuse to perform so long as her father is in charge of her affairs, her lawyers said.
A major setback for Britney Spears, a judge denying her request to remove her father from his role as conservator, signing an order that keeps Jamie Spears in control of his daughter's finances. The court filing stating that Britney is unable.
So you look at this guy and you can just tell from his, just his demeanor and his other daughter and his grandkids, Britney's kids, have all said this guy's a real a-hole, right? Just you can look at him and he's just like some sort of nasty person. There's something off about this guy, right? And this is somebody who's been sucking off of his children, using them as child performers. All those momagers and Hollywood dads and parents who sell their kids to Disney and all these things are not good people, right? We saw this with the whole Michael Jackson stuff, with parents handing their kids over to Michael Jackson for, whatever they thought they were getting out of it. It's not like this is some sort of a shocker. Like, it's not like we don't know what happens to child stars and Disney stars. We do, right? Like, we do know. They get on drugs. They get, various psychological disorders. They can't sustain relationships. They die young. Sometimes they're suicidal. Or they maybe all of them or whatever. Some of them act on it. I mean, there's all these things that we know, negative things, about a parent selling their kids over to the Hollywood beast and the kid becoming a Hollywood celebrity. And then a child celebrity, and what happens to them. And we know this even from the music industry as adults, right? What happens to performers. So when you're a parent and you want to, make some money off your kids, or whatever, you want your kids to be famous for whatever reason, whatever narcissistic reason, as a way to validate yourself or whatever it is, you're a piece of crap, right? Like you just, what's going to happen to them. You might be in denial or whatever your rationalization is for it, but we know what happens to those types of kids. They get messed up for life. So it isn't like this guy is some, good dad and he's trying to make sure Britney doesn't blow all her money. We know what the kind of, person he is, right? Because he sold her out to Disney in the first place and she got messed up because of it.
Control of his daughter's finances. The court filing stating that Britney is unable to manage his or her financial resources or to resist fraud or undue influence. The decision coming after the superstar's explosive testimony last week, calling the conservatorships abusive and traumatizing. In new legal filings, Jamie Spears insists he had nothing to do with his daughter's poor treatment and is demanding an investigation into her concerns.
Well, if he's a conservator, he should have been making sure it didn't happen. Like he's her dad and in charge of her finances and her life. And he's like, oh, we should investigate this. It was your job to protect her. That's what a conservator, the people who run the conservatorship are.
Since her very public breakdown in 2008, the pop superstar has been under a court-sanctioned conservatorship that has given her father and others power over her personal and financial affairs. During the explosive hearing last week, Spears said she had been drugged.
Okay, so we know about this, right? I want to talk about this, what this means to the rest of us. There's one more piece to this. Britney Spears' co-conservator of estate, Bessemer, exited over Jamie issues. Bessemer Trust, so this is a some sort of firm that's in charge of the legal aspects of this has withdrew because they don't want any part of, the bad publicity and the Free Britney people. So that's, something. They're a $140 billion company. And they were like, they want to exit this because it's, no matter how it plays out, they're going to look like the villains along with her dad. And so they need somebody like this. They need a professional co-conservator files to resign from explosive testimony. They're the legal branch, right? This is something Jamie Spears couldn't be a conservator by himself. He has to hire a professional law firm or financial institution that specializes in conservatorships. And that entity is bailing on this whole Britney thing. But in terms of what this means to us is that, conservatorships, which most people don't know about, and you can say, all right, for people who are elderly, that have some sort of Alzheimer's and their mental capacities and faculties have broken down, and they have millions, maybe billions of dollars of assets and resources that's supposed to go to the kids or whatever charities, and you're going to have people trying to scam them out of it. And, these people they don't have the ability, the mental functioning. Someone like Joe Biden showing that kind of mental breakdown, right? Joe Biden would be, somebody that would be a candidate for this. And so the kids and the family come in and they just, take power of attorney, and they just, but they have to set up and take care of the person. But in Britney's case, this is a grown-ass woman who wants to have kids, and she has the biggest thing here is she had to take forced IUDs, forced birth control, against her will, based in the conservatorship. She was said that she can't have any more kids, that she has, mentally incapable of having children. And I talked about this in another video. All these female singers who you would say, all right, they are on or close to Britney Spears level, and they all have way more money than her. Like, her money's gone. She has 60 million, and Christina Aguilera has like 160 million, right? Why does Christina Aguilera, who is not nearly as popular as Britney Spears, have 100 million more than her? Like, they've bled her dry of her money. Like, who knows how much money she actually has left? Her dad and whatever these, people are, but they've also controlled her life. See, Britney has a huge fan base, and there are people in the truth community that love Britney. Many of you love Britney because she represents a different sort of a person than you would normally think of as a Hollywood celebrity, because she's, a blonde white girl from the country. Country music outsells various other types of popular music, but they don't, the powers that be, the Grammys and Hollywood, doesn't recognize country music artists as being on the same level. People look down on country music, but if you look at like American Idol or The Voice or those kinds of programs, country music artists usually win. The same reason that Trump was so popular, because there's a lot of white people living in rural areas, and the majority of the people in this country, 70%, are white people, and a lot of those people in the South and the West, and even in northern states. In California, there's country people, there's redneck type people you would call rednecks, right? In places like Connecticut and in New York State. In New York State, you get away from the cities, right? There's that guy who was he's a Southern, political advisor for Clinton, and he's, famous. Can't remember his name. It's not important. Don't tell me, don't care, don't need to know. But the guy had this famous quote where he said, Pennsylvania is Philadelphia on one side and Pittsburgh on the other side, and Alabama everywhere else. And so you have a lot of people out there that like Britney Spears and identify with her in ways that they don't with like other, pop stars and the rest of it. So she was much more popular and probably made a lot more money than, someone like Christina Aguilera and like some of these other. I mean, she was on Madonna's level, and a more likable Madonna, and Madonna is worth $880 million. And so you see a lot of her money's already disappeared. But even worse than that, think about the control they have over this person's life. Because she was a mega superstar, she had some sort of a psychological breakdown, as Justin Bieber has done, as almost every celebrity has some sort of a mental breakdown. But they took control of her finances and then also her life. And the big phrase here, because I worked in these treatment programs, and the big phrase is, we're just here to keep you safe. Like, and you're going to hear that a lot. You're going to hear this with maybe people who are Trump supporters or truthers in the future, where they're going to say, hey, you're mentally incompetent and you can't, you can't manage your own finances or your own decisions about your physical health. And they're going to force you to do things like this is, the kind of stuff they can do when they put people on a psychiatric hold. And they can make anybody sound crazy. And they can give you psychological drugs that will impair and affect your decision making. I mean, who knows what made Britney shave her head and go nuts that night. But when she did that, they said, all right, we're going to take control of your finances in your life for the rest of your life, not allow you to, spend your money and milk her dry, bleed her dry, right? And her dad, who's older and a guy who brought his children into the world of Disney and child entertainment, which messes up kids anyway, and their parents, their relationship to their parents who exploits them. And so this is more about what they can do to anybody. Like, this is something they can do to Britney Spears, who's a public figure, and she has a team of fans that have her back, in air quotes. And what's the worst thing she can do? Blow all her money and become homeless, right? What's the worst thing that she could do? Like, it's her money. Like, if she's mentally incompetent, she gets to do that. People make bad business decisions all the time. Mentally competent rich people will lose a fortune, right? Is someone going to go over to MC Hammer and, like there are people who are business people. Donald Trump went bankrupt twice. He filed for Chapter 11. People who are ultra wealthy lose their wealth and their kids lose their wealth. It just happens. Wealth disappears. She made a lot of money and she could blow through it. And, people can scam her out of it, whatever it might be. But it's her money. It's not like, the stuff about her shaving her head and going nuts, yeah, maybe she's, risk to herself. Whatever MK Ultra or whatever stuff that happened over at Disney or with her dad or whatever it is, right, to mess her up and make her sound like a child. She definitely has mental functioning issues and she's on medication too, so who knows where all those come from. But what's the worst thing that can happen? She can blow her money. Like she, as opposed to having people manage her and bully her, right? And, all these things that she claims is going on. And she's not a happy person. She says she's miserable. So why not let her blow through her money and become homeless or whatever? They'll let her, that's the, what's wrong with that, right? In terms of, we just got to keep you safe. And when you hear those words, no, we're just trying to keep you safe. It's a thing that happens. Nurse Ratched kind of stuff. But anyways, that's Britney Spears.
I think, first of all, no, I did not forget to take my medication.
So this is Alyssa Milano, someone who is wanting to run for political office. And one of her trolls said, did you forget to take your medication? And this was her response.
I think, first of all, no, I did not forget to take my medication. I take my medication every day. I have anxiety with complex PTS.
She means PTSD.
And panic disorder. So I take my medicine because I like to just be functional.
So without medicine, she can't be functional. Without her psychological anti-anxiety medication, she can't function.
And I also think, I think it's time that we destigmatize medication for mental health, like we've destigmatized, say, Botox.
We should be open about mental health medication like we're open about the the great benefits of Botox to get rid of wrinkles, and mess up your, to create, what is it that paralyzes nerves in your face so your face relaxes, right? I mean, it's some sort of, Botox is like some sort of, what is it, like I don't know if it's a virus or something, but it's, not a good thing.
Okay, thanks for listening.
You're welcome, Alyssa. Alyssa Milano confirms she's considering a run for Congress in 2024. And so this is a person who was a child actress, much like Britney Spears, and then became a faketivist, one of these, one of these people who are a Hollywood celebrity that becomes a political activist and speaks out about subject matters, right? Now, I know she has anxiety because you can hear it in her voice. The way she talks, you can hear the fear and nervousness. Like she talks in a way, I mean, she has one of those, I mean, just by the way she expresses herself, you can feel the fear, like you can feel the anxiety and the nervousness. And, when you have issues like this, right, I'm a part of, one of my big things here is talking about fixing or repairing your internal world, divinizing your internal world through the heartfulness meditation. And I also worked as a clinician and a counselor. And, those things are real. People are suffering. They're suffering from psychological disorders, everybody to some extent, because of the system, because of various things. I mean, the demonic and materialistic aspect of our system that keeps people from being natural and having natural health. And the disconnect from the family, the disconnect from God and your soul's path and purpose. And then weird stuff like, the type of foods and toxins in the atmosphere, not weird stuff, but the conditions of our society. And then electromagnetic frequency poisoning that disrupts your nervous system. And, all the things now with Wi-Fi, I mean, electricity in itself and then Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. And so there's a complex reasons for people having, there's multiple reasons that all have to do with the system. But the psychological model never says it's the system's fault. It says the system's great and that you're the problem. But everybody has something. But medications are, the psychological pharmaceutical medications all have side effects, and there's issues with those medications. But if she's saying that she has to take those medications to function, that's fine. That is whatever it is. She's found her way to deal with her issues. But that should preclude her from being somebody who, I don't know, is considering to run for Congress. Who else has a lot of anxiety when she talks is Nancy Pelosi. People who are very fear-based shouldn't be. People who have panic disorders and people who have a lot of anxiety shouldn't run for, a powerful position, right? Anxiety is going to affect your decision-making. Fear is a unpleasant thing. Somebody with an anger problem shouldn't, somebody who's being medicated for an anger problem. She says she wants to destigmatize her, her medication taking, but there's valid concerns that people should have with people who are, I assume she's saying PTSD, and she has severe anxiety and panic attacks. And in what situation would you want a leader? Let's say you were in some like a movie type situation. You're trapped in a, a very stressful, life-threatening situation. Would you say, all right, we got to elect a leader. Here, there's a guy over there having panic attacks. He's got anxiety disorder, and he's on so much medication, because medication, people know what those psychological medications do to you. It affects you. It affects your, other parts of your, brain activity and other things. Puts you in a fog-like state, makes it hard to make decisions. The side effects are listed for the medications. And so she's somebody who says she has panic attacks and anxiety disorder, and she's being medicated for it. And she, thinks that qualifies her for leadership. That's not the kind of people you would normally elect, right? People who are having difficulties severe psychological difficulties and mood disorders, so much so that they have to take medication or they can't function. This is a person who had a comment, "Did you take your medication?" And her response was to the troll, "I take it every day because I got all this messed up stuff going on, right? All this anxiety, all these things." And so this should, stop her from being a person who's advocating for things, because she's coming from a place of fear. She's coming from a place where she says she can't function unless she takes her medication. And so that is not a person who should be a leader, right? And again, like, people think, all right, if you have a fear of something, like you have a fear of heights, you should go do parachuting or something, right? Like, you should do something to overcome your fear. And that's ridiculous as well. But there's ways, like the heartfulness meditation cleans away these things over a long period of time and helps divinize you, helps you to connect to God in your soul's path, which also has a positive effect, because a lot of the reasons people are messed up psychologically is because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not doing what their soul's path, they're not doing what their soul is supposed to be doing. Their soul wants them to do, right? Their purpose for being here. Most people are lost and they're going in the wrong direction. They're going away from God. They're going away from their true purpose. They're going away from what's healthy and natural for them. And so they're experiencing psychological difficulties because of it. I mean, I said this over and over again, that once you start doing what you're supposed to do, a lot of these things are either mitigated or they disappear altogether, especially if there's cleaning away of the samskaras and the conditions that have caused it. But a lot of these things that people suffer from, if you have forgotten to do something, or there's something lingering that you have to have a conversation with somebody, you have to resolve something hanging over your head at work or in one of your relationships, and you're not sleeping well, right? You're stressed out because there's this thing that you have to do and you're avoiding doing it, and you're worried about doing it, and you just think about it, and you feel unsettled, you feel, rattled in things, right? And so that happens when you are, there's things that you have to do that you're not doing. And most people, that's the case. And so what they do is try to self-medicate and do things to help them, because they're in a state of denial and they're refusing to do something they need to do. And it causes these types of symptoms: anger, fear, all these things, anxiety, all the rest of it. And so, having a more natural life and all the things I talk about here are a way to alleviate all of these types of conditions. Our system and our society doesn't want you. Well, he wants to keep you effed up, right? You have to, it messes people up for a reason, because they're more easy to control. That's why they got people off the farm in the first place. Boy Scouts reach $850 million settlement with tens of thousands of sexual abuse victims. The settlement is the largest in child sexual abuse case in U.S. history. And so think about that, right? What the Boy Scouts have become it was overwhelmed with pedos. More than 84,000 people are part of this lawsuit, and who knows how many people haven't come forward. So it was basically this one giant pedo ring. And it should be dismantled. You can't repair something like that. The same thing with the Catholic Church. Think about these organizations that are supposed to be, this is supposed to prepare young men to be, young boys to be men and help them learn about various types of skills and things like that. And the church is supposed to connect people with God. And it's not just the Catholic Church. There's lots of religious organizations that have been involved in human trafficking and, child abuse and things like this. And so these organizations that are supposed to be, they're pillars of the community, and you're finding out that they're just, filled with ugliness. Shacari Richards could miss Olympics after failed drug test. I became aware of this person because MSNBC was pushing her out there because, they're going to de-emphasize men in sports. They're doing that. They're trying to push women in sports. And she was the world's fastest woman in terms of the 100-meter race, which is something that they put on MSNBC Sports. And I saw it a couple weeks ago, and they were pushing this out there. So NBC has the Olympic contract. They have the Olympic coverage. And most people don't care about the most of the Olympic sports the other 4 years. So right before the Olympics, they start developing profiles and narratives of the athletes so you'll have some interest in the competition. And they start pimping out or pushing certain athletes to be like megastars. And this person was one of them, right? NBC News and MSNBC was making this person very visible to be one of these Olympic megastars, the world's fastest woman, allegedly. And she didn't test positive for testosterone or for enhancement, some sort of steroids or something like that. She tests positive for THC because she was smoking pot, right? Now this is a person who they're already starting to push out there as the world's fastest woman, and she was going to have endorsements. And the big thing for track and field people or people who are that their sports are specifically celebrated in the Olympics, right? The Olympics is their time to shine on a global stage, and they get all these endorsements, and they become multimillionaires. But something like this derails the person. I mean, she probably has some endorsements still, but she's going to miss out on millions of dollars. And the reason I'm covering this is because this is her tweet. I am human. She's saying that she couldn't stop herself from smoking pot for, 6 months, a drug that's not supposed to be addictive. So she could cash in on millions of dollars of endorsements and money. Like and just in a time where they're pushing women and all these other things. Like she would have been somebody who was celebrated, and she could have, rode that thing, that gravy train. She could have smoked all the pot she wanted. But, maybe she goes to the Olympics in 4 years or whatever it is, if there is one. I don't think this could be the last Olympics, and she could have cashed in. But because she's human, she had to smoke her pot. Con man charges Trump organization a tax cheat. There's a young Donald J. Trump organization is top executive charged with financial crimes. I covered this yesterday. And they're just, they're writing this thing out with Trump. I talked about it yesterday. Like, this is never going to stop. Trump is going to be chased down. They're going to be, he's going to be hunted until the day he dies. I don't think Trump was a legitimate politician, but he was different in some ways. He didn't play by the same rules. And, he did things to piss certain power groups off. He has his own powerful backers, but they usually would never do this about going after a former president because, look at Richard Nixon. Like, he never served a day in jail, and he committed crimes, and he was a part of the cover-up. They got rid of him, and he disappeared. That's what usually happens. And then you focus on your new president. But our new president is drooling on himself, and, they need to consistently blame everything on somebody, and it's not going to be JoJo Magoo, and so they're going to keep Trump around whatever way they can. And it's just, fairly obvious to people who are, slightly awake, and they aren't leaning to the left. And so that's only a small group of people, but it doesn't matter because the people don't have any power, and this is their way of, dealing with all these things. Portland, Oregon soared to 116-degree temperatures, hotter than Dallas, Miami, and LA have ever been. So Oregon, which is in the northern part of the West, right? It is, not a place that is, down south or something like that, had 116-degree temperatures, and it is some sort of a record. But what they're saying here is that the electrical grid in the western part of the country is flawed, and other parts of the country as well. And so there seems to be going to be power outages and, of course, wildfires. And, I know it's been getting hotter out there because I was, out in these various places. And, some days you just can't go outside. In the, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Utah area, the desert, it's getting unlivable because people have built buildings, and we could also say that about this here. Condo president warned of deterioration needed for repairs for months before collapse. And we have a collapsing infrastructure. I know there's this infrastructure bill that's not going to deal with it because the majority of the money is going towards other things. But this country was built at a, well, let me come back to this. There's one other thing I want to cover here. First time astrophysicists detected a black hole swallowing a neutron star. Well, that doesn't sound good. There's this going on. Like, is this, of course, most people don't believe in this kind of stuff. But, if this really happened, black holes are eating neutron stars. And so I guess there's maybe bigger things to be concerned about. So back to this thing about where our buildings are built. My brother and I were talking, and he had this story about our grandfather who lived in Florida, had retired in Florida. I've talked about this guy before. There's me and him. He took me deep sea fishing a number of times, and he was sort of like, the coolest of my grandparents. He played professional football. He was a fireman. He was a soldier in both world wars. He volunteered when he was 15. He came from German descent, and he knew how to build things. He made fishing poles and all these other things. And he worked on a lot of those buildings that were being built at the ocean. And when my brother was a kid, my brother is 17 years older than me. So he was in, Vietnam when I was 2 years old. So I don't have much of a memory of my brother living in the house. And I was the youngest of 5 kids. And there's a huge gap between me and my siblings. The next closest to me was my daughter, who was 10 years older than me. So you can see the gap there. And a couple of miscarriages. My parents were Catholic, Irish and Italian, and, German, Albanian. And so anyways, my grandfather said to my brother, it was the craziest thing he ever saw, them building these buildings on the beach because, it was the ocean. There's going to be hurricanes and storms. And the other thing, I watched this, I don't know whether it's a documentary or something about Florida, and it is basically floating on fresh water. That when you dig down in Florida, and I'm aware of this from living there, I lived there for a brief period of time, went to school, my first attempt at college, and, my parents retired there, and my grandparents were down there. And we used to go down there every year, or, a couple times maybe, and we go like deep sea fishing. I just love Florida. My grandfather had retired there when there was nobody in Boca Raton, before Boca Raton became a place there. It's a big built up place now, retirement homes and all those things. But they moved down there like in the 50s or 60s or whatever it was. And they had been there my entire life. And he had built the Boca West Club where famous people go to, and like he was a part of a bunch of those things. He was retired, but he'd do some side projects and things. And he knew about construction. And if you dig a hole in Florida like 5 feet deep, it fills with fresh water, and you have a pond, slightly salinated fresh water. Because the hole, it's just a sandbar, and what was explained in this show I was watching is that the water table, the fresh water table in Florida, is that the fresh water is pushing against the salt water from the ocean. And that's why you're able to have trees and, crops and orange trees and avocado trees and all these things that they grow in Florida because of the fresh water underneath the ground. And that's the case everywhere. But Florida is like a giant sandbar. And then you have these sandbar type islands. They're just mounds of sand that become, pushed up against the shore. And you have all these sort of barrier islands all the way up the coast through Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina. And of course, people want to live there. And so they build hotels and vacation homes, but there's no basements, right? They're all just sitting on, like they're floating, like Florida's sort of floating like a sandbar, right? Saturated with fresh water. And it's just, it's like just slightly above sea level. We remember what happened in Louisiana, they built the various parishes in Louisiana below sea level because people want to live near the ocean. It's like 80% of the people live within so many miles of the coast. And my grandfather saw them building these buildings, and he knew that they weren't going to last. But you see it just across the board as well, because America is, for the most part, the infrastructure of America is about 100 to 75 years old. Most of the stuff, the roads, the sewers, all the things, the buildings, the foundations, and concrete starts to unbind. Cement starts to lose its bondage, right? You see this with glues. You glue something, and it stays glued for a period of time, and then the molecular bonds start to break after a certain time length, right? With crazy glue, one of these quick drying glues, it bonds really quickly, but the bonds don't last, and that's what happens to cement. So you have all this infrastructure that's been placed, and then the cities have been built on top of it, and now it's starting to collapse. That's why civilizations don't last, because the buildings don't last. And nature starts to reclaim them. And in America, and I've covered this in some of my older videos, we built various places in swampland or by the ocean or on fault lines. I mean, they build these nuclear power plants always near fault lines because they seem to work better there or something. And so there's all these places that are unstable, or the deserts. I talked about that when I lived out in Utah. They create these fake dams. They start damming up the rivers, and they create some sort of blockage in a valley next to some mountains, and they create these lakes. When we were in Vegas and Utah, you see all these fake lakes out there, of course the Hoover Dam, and all that fresh water doesn't run to where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go somewhere in these rivers, but these desert states are taking the water before it reaches its inevitable destination. And that's why you go to like the Rio Grande and it's dry, like this big riverbed, because all the water from the northern part of the country is being taken away, being siphoned away in the mountains in these desert areas. But people weren't supposed to live in these places, beautiful places. I loved it out there. I still have lots of pictures of those places. Bryce Canyon and some of these deserts, Snow Canyon, some of these places out there are just incredible. Of course, Zion and the Grand Canyon, more famous. But there's just beauty out there everywhere. The color, the condition, it's very spiritual. But there's no water and it's hot as shit. And so, what they've done is compensate and, build towns and houses in places that people aren't supposed to live because it's not conducive. And nature wants to make it back into a swamp. Or the ocean wants to reclaim the sandbars, these small islands that have, multi-million-dollar houses on them and things. Because, eventually nature reclaims things and reworks them, especially things that are temporary and where there's water involved or no water involved, right? Because what's happened is, people build buildings on mountaintops and they have, they're hit by lightning and there's just all these problems with it because you're not supposed to live there, right? You're supposed to live in the valley where there's water and you're protected, from the wind and these other things. But people want the view off the mountaintops. You see it throughout the, western part of the country and other places along the Appalachian Mountains. So there's all these houses built in, places that only a strong system and strong infrastructure will allow you to live there. The roads that are in mountains and the roads that are on these sandbars, all these things eventually will break down. And now we're entering into the upheaval phase and we're broke as shit, right? And everything's breaking down, the bridges, everything all at once, because they've built places, it wasn't going to last forever anyway. And they built in places that aren't conducive for people to live in. And that's what's happening right now. Nature's going to reclaim a lot of these places, and we don't have the money and the will and the resources to rebuild it, right? People were hungry when they came to America. Immigrants coming to America who, came from intense poverty, and they wanted to build America, right? The, various populations of laborers We don't have that. We have entitled brats, right? And so we don't have the will to redo these things. The world is kind of sick of America, and you'll see that more emerging in the future. And so it's over, right? Just everything's breaking down. We're breaking down morally. People are living in their cyber universes, and we want to put up more cell towers, but our roads and bridges are falling apart. And this, trillions of dollars of money is going to be looted away by JoJo and his pals. I mean, that's not really going to end up doing what needs to be done in terms of the infrastructure, and all these things are going to continuously collapse. And there's going to be events that are so powerful and catastrophic that we couldn't do anything about them anyway. Storms are intensifying, fires are intensifying. I mean, this is part of it's to do with nature, some of it's man-made, but it's all about the end of our civilization, because it's the end of a yuga, and it's a very tumultuous time, and things are just going to go that way. I talk about that with the heartfulness system. There's a divine will behind this, and we can't oppose it. The forces, the divine forces that look over this planet have ruled that our civilization, its time is up, right? It's over, and there's nothing we can do to save it. And this is all stuff you'll see in the Apocalaughs as we move forward. If you stand in the ocean and there's waves, like, pretty good sized waves, not even like surfing waves, but, powerful waves. And you could be a big dude. I mean, I weigh like, 240 pounds, like a big, 6'1", whatever. And it just will knock you around like you're, rag doll. Like you could be an elephant. I mean, whatever you are. Like the ocean is so powerful. And when it, kicks in, and then you talk about something like a tsunami or earthquakes and things like this. I mean, the power of a storm when there's, 140-mile-an-hour winds and, these storm surges and things. And people can't even conceive of the power that's there and what it can just move stuff. Like you have these giant boulders are built around built around shorelines, and they just get thrown around like they're nothing, And so there's going to be a lot of that, because we felt like we've controlled nature and that we can do these things, and we're stronger than nature, and we can build things to weather the storms, and we really can't. I mean, it's we're all going to feel small when you're in the ocean. You get tossed around, and you look at the vastness of the ocean, and you're just like this this tiny speck on this giant planet, and you get a sense of your own limitations and your physicality and things. And that's going to be, there's going to be a humbling that's coming next, right? You're going to watch a humbling of the arrogance of the human beings. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.